In northeastern Kenya, nomads are still grappling with the effects of a drought that humanitarian agencies are calling the worst in decades. The United Nations says that pastoralists in Kenya and Somalia have lost millions of their livestock, and at least 3 million people in Kenya alone will need food aid. The UN's World Food Programme now says that more than 11 million people are in need of food assistance and not 6 million as previously thought. And joining us now in the studio today for more discussion on the crisis in East Africa is Shannon Scribner, Humanitarian Policy Manager of the International Relief and Development Organization, OXFAM. She's currently leading the humanitarian policy team here in Washington and has worked on OXFAM's humanitarian responses in the DRC, Liberia, Ethiopia, Somalia, and other areas. Shannon, thank you so much for coming to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to go right to this declaration or the announcement by Al-Shabaab that it actually is in fact not allowed or is not allowing aid agencies back into the country. What kind of implications does this pose to aid agencies like yours and also their needs for the people suffering?
Well, in terms of South Central Somalia, where the famine declaration in 2 regions has been declared, I mean, getting into that area as soon as possible and ramping up operations as soon as we can is the most important thing right now. So regardless of Al-Shabaab restrictions or other restrictions by the U.S. government in terms of getting in to deliver assistance, needs to be lifted given the situation on the ground. And aid agencies need to go in, and we can't get into a war over words about is this a famine or is it not. We need to go in there immediately, assess the situation and provide assistance. And there are some organizations that are already operating in that area.
Now obviously Al-Shabaab is a big player in whether or not aid agencies can operate, and they affect and they control a lot of the areas where the need is heaviest. So what are the options to still deliver assistance to those places?
The options are for aid agencies who have been working in these areas for 20 to 30 years, who are Somalis that are delivering the aid themselves. These are Somali aid workers who know the communities, who know the local leaders, to negotiate bit by bit, territory by territory, to get in where they can and provide assistance at the local level, working with local leaders, and to trust aid agencies to be able to do that.
You just raised the point about, not getting into the politics of whether this is a drought, whether this is a famine, but it does seem to evoke a lot of questions. Is when is a situation a famine and when is a situation a drought? Can you explain to us what is the definition and what is the distinction?
So just to be clear, it's a regional crisis right now with 11 million people affected in Ethiopia and Kenya and Somalia, and most of the people affected right now are actually in Ethiopia if you look at the numbers. But what's happening in southern Somalia is it's a number situation. So for every 2 adults out of 10,000, two are dying a day due to nutrition-related causes. For children, it's 4 a day. 4 children out of 10,000 a day that are dying now due to nutritional-related causes. It has to do with 30% malnutrition rates that are extremely high, acute malnutrition rates, and then households in terms of their ability to cope. Right now, 20% of households do not have the coping mechanisms, enough food or assets to kind of survive this drought in South Central Somalia. But the needs are everywhere in this region. It's really, we need to pull out of Somalia and also look at Ethiopia and Kenya as well.
Now, one of the representatives from OXFAM noted that this has been coming for a long time. The response should have been earlier, should have been harder, it should have been more. And yet it was at its best slow, inadequate and complacent. Should this response have been expedited? And whose fault is it that it wasn't?
It absolutely should have. We knew back in August of last year there were early warning systems that were in place and they were working to tell us that this was coming. And unfortunately, the international community, national governments as well, were just slow to respond to situations like this, and we need to wait until it gets into the spotlight on the news or we see famine or these images before we really react. Some governments pre-position supplies. The U.S. government should be commended for that. They started looking at this back in the fall, but it's a little, it's too little, too late. The needs are immense. We need immediate funding, and in the long term we have to look at why people are so vulnerable in the first place.
And also when you look at a situation like Somalia, in fact the whole of the Horn, which has been vulnerable to this kind of situation for so long, can you explain to us why there isn't a mechanism in place all the time to ensure that food is available, that famine doesn't kill people the way it's doing?
I think it's that issue, but it's this perfect storm where you have this drought that's created some of the driest areas that we've seen in over 60 years. You have rainy seasons that are just failing in terms of very poor rains, but you also have conflict in Somalia as well that is exacerbating the situation, and you have people that are extremely poor. So we need a holistic approach, looking at the region. The Somalia conflict is a regional issue. We need to look at the food security, but the conflict and poverty as well.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Shannon Scribner of OXFAM. She joined us in our studio today on the discussion on the Horn of Africa, famine and drought. Hope to see you back here with more details, better news soon.
I hope so.
Okay. Now, for more information on any of today's stories, please visit us online at voaafrica.com. You can also visit us on Facebook. Just search for In Focus.